Happy Thursday, Bullfrogs. All right, we're going to read from chapter 15 today. We're only going to have time to read one chapter. And then tomorrow we're going to finish our book of Christmas in Camelot with chapter 16. All right, so here we go. Chapter 15 is called Christmas Magic. Jack and Annie watched in horror as the water from the cup splashed all over the stone floor. It trickled into the cracks between the stones and disappeared. Jack scrambled to the cup. He picked it up. It was completely empty. "Oh no," Jack moaned. He sat back and put his head in his hands. Camelot will never wake up now, he thought. The legend will end forever. "Jack," said Annie, "look." Jack raised his head. He pushed his glasses into place. A golden cloud was rising from the cracks between all the stones of the floor. The cloud spread quickly throughout the great hall, filling the room with wonderful smells, the scent of cedar smoke and evergreen and roses and almonds. The cloud rose up and up, then wafted out through the upper windows of the hall. Suddenly, a white dove flew through one of the windows. It soared across the dark room like a bright light, then swooped back into the night. Soft, gentle laughter came from the end of the hall. The laughter grew louder. Jack saw King Arthur and Queen Guinevere looking at one another. They were laughing. The Knights of the Round Table were laughing too. Best of all, Jack saw Morgan Le Fay smiling at him and Annie. "Jack, Annie, come here," she called. She held out her arms. "Morgan!" cried Annie. She ran to Morgan and threw her arms around the enchantress. Jack stood up. Still holding the empty cup, he ran to Morgan and hugged her too. "We did what the Christmas night told us to do," said Annie. "We brought back the water of memory and imagination." "But I dropped the cup," said Jack, "and spilled all over the floor." "But the water made a gold cloud," said Annie, "and everyone came back to life." Morgan laughed with amazement. "You have just returned from the other world?" she asked. "Yes," said Annie. "A white stag brought us back," said Jack. He turned to King Arthur. "Your Majesty," he said, "we have good news. Your knights are safe. Sir Lancelot said to tell you they'd be home before the first night of the new year." The king looked bewildered. "You found them?" "Yes, they're all fine," said Annie. "Here," said Jack. He handed the silver cup to the king. "Please give this back to Sir Galahad, and this to Sir Lancelot," said Annie. She took the glass key from around her neck and gave it to King Arthur. "Oh, and this to Sir Percival," said Jack. He pulled the wooden compass box from his pack and gave it to the king. At first, King Arthur was too stunned to speak. Then he clapped his hands and laughed joyfully. "Thank you," he said to Jack and Annie. The Knights of the Round Table all cheered. "Ring the bells," King Arthur shouted. "Call the people of Camelot to the castle." "They have already gathered outside the doors, Your Majesty," said a page. "Bring them in," said King Arthur. "We must rejoice together." Queen Guinevere smiled at Jack and Annie. Her eyes sparkled now. "Once again, you have helped save Camelot," she said. "Thank you very much." "You're welcome," said Jack and Annie together. Then Jack heard the sound of children talking and laughing. He turned to see a crowd of people streaming through the arched doorway of the great hall. They carried candles and a giant fir tree and boughs of holly and pine. Musicians followed them with stringed instruments. As everyone started to decorate the hall, the musicians began playing and singing a beautiful Christmas carol. "Jack," said Annie, "look." The white stag was standing in the arched doorway. Jack turned excitedly to Morgan. "See that white stag?" he said. "He took us to the other world. See him?" Morgan smiled. "Yes, I do see him," she said. "And now I see everything." Jack looked back at the doorway. The stag was gone. In his place stood an old man with a long white beard. He held a staff and wore a flowing red cloak, the same red cloak Jack and Annie had worn on their quest. Who is it? Y'all know who it is? Y'all see him right here? Who is it? Who's that? Jack asked. That is Merlin the magician, said Morgan. It was Merlin who invited you here. I see that now. Merlin, said Jack. He sent us the royal invitation? Yes, said Morgan. Then he put the rest of us under a spell, and he carried you to the other world. No, said Annie, the Christmas night put you under a spell. And the white stag carried us to the other world, said Jack. Morgan smiled. Merlin was both the Christmas night and the white stag, she said. Remember, he's a magician, not a mortal. He can change his shape whenever he wishes. Oh, wow, whispered Annie. Why did Merlin do these things? Asked Jack. Merlin was angry when King Arthur banished magic from Camelot, said Morgan. I see now he finally took matters into his own hands. How? Said Jack. He knew King Arthur would send no more knights to the other world for the water of memory and imagination, said Morgan. So I assume he brought you to Camelot, hoping that you would offer to go instead. Why did he want us to go? Said Annie. Merlin has often heard my tales of your adventures in the treehouse, said Morgan. He knows you both have a great desire to fight for the good, and he knows you use the gift of imagination very well. Those two special qualities need to succeed in any quest. Jack and Annie looked back at Merlin. From far across the room, the white-bearded magician smiled at them. He raised his staff, then he slipped out the door. Jack looked around the great hall. All the candles and torches were lit now. A fire blazed in the hearth. The musicians were playing. Everyone was singing. The room glowed with warm firelight and rosy faces. At last, Christmas in Camelot was just as Jack had imagined it would be. The spell of the dark wizard had been broken. The great hall was filled with beauty and love and joy and light. All right, ooh, that was a good chapter. All right, tomorrow we're going to get to finish our book with reading chapter 16. It's called Welcome Home. So chapter 16, and we'll finish up our book tomorrow. All right, thank y'all for reading with me today. We'll see you tomorrow on Friday. Goodbye.